everyone on the call. I am one of the partners with Aspire Consulting. I just wanted to introduce Ryan, who's going to be leading the demo for PeopleSoft Time and Labor. Ryan is one of our seasoned consultants. He has over 17 years of experience with PeopleSoft and ERP systems, and he's going to lead us through the demos also being recorded. So if it's something you guys would like post, you can reach out to us and we'll make sure you have access to the recording. Go ahead, Ryan.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules, I'm sure, to join us here today. Hopefully you find this useful. I've been asked to do a presentation on some of the latest features in time and labor. I'm not claiming that these are the absolute latest features, but they're included in the last 5 or 6 images. So just give you a little heads up of what we're going to be going through today. I don't know what everybody's experience is with time and labor. Not sure if you all have it installed and are using it today, or if you're just kind of getting more of a general sense of what time and labor is all about. Unfortunately, we won't be doing a very large overview of it, but I will take a few minutes just to have a quick chat about some of the key concepts in time and labor. Then we're going to get into the auto enrollment feature. I spent many years working on time and labor without an auto enrollment option, and have developed many programs to go do the enrollment for organizations, and now having a structure within PeopleSoft to do it feels good to have that now. So we'll be walking through how that can be set up and implemented for you. Then we're going to look at some quick fill options. This is a very quick, oddly enough, quick thing for us to go through, but we'll talk about how employees can set up quick fill options to have standard sets of data that they'll attach to their reported time and not have to key it over and over again for each day or each pay period. So more to come on that. Then we're going to look at the timesheet lockdown feature. Was added recently. This allows administrators to go in and lock down the employees' access, update access to be clear, to their timesheets. And that can be done, as we'll see, by prior and period, current and prior periods, or one or the other. Last piece we'll look at is the fluid reported time audit page. This was also recently added, so we'll take a look at some examples in there of how the audit data for reported time can be viewed through the fluid interface. And we should have plenty of time at the end. I don't anticipate going, we're 54 minutes now left. We'll probably be more in the 40 to 45 minute range. So if there are questions at the end, certainly don't hesitate to speak up and ask. So we're going to hang out here in the PowerPoint for just a little while longer. Time and labor overview. So for those of you that already understand all this, this might be a little bit boring, but we'll get through this pretty quickly. Time and labor is made up for time reporters. So you might have employees or contingent workers or people of interest in your organization, but inside of time and labor, everybody is referred to as a time reporter. As we'll go through this enrollment piece, or the auto enrollment piece, employees need to be enrolled in time and labor. They need to be set up with a work group. They need to be set up with time periods, and that establishes how they'll be treated in time and labor. Do they report their time in the form of punches, in and out times, or they report it as elapsed time? So a time reporter needs to be defined for each employee. And then in the actual act of reporting time, they have timesheets that they fill out. These are structured in different ways, depending on what meets the needs of your organization. They can be set up with in and out times, like a punch time reporter would report. They can be set up for an entire month, and we're just reporting our time off, or paid time off, or holidays, whatever the case might be. So there's different types of time reporters. As I mentioned, we have punch time reporters and elapsed time reporters. That time could potentially need to be approved. Each organization can determine whether they want those timesheets to be approved by a supervisor, by an administrator, by your HR office. That it's completely configurable, but it's not a requirement. So you can also allow an employee to submit their timesheet and it goes on for processing. In other instances, you may want the employee to submit their timesheet for approval, and then there would be an extra step for an individual to come in and review that timesheet and approve it. In either manner, the time will eventually be prepared to go into the time administration process, which is where all the reported time is compiled. We can process rules against that time, overtime rules, shift differential rules, leave accrual rules. It's an endless bucket of things that you can do. So the time administration process is a very robust piece that allows you to process those rules, allows you to check for errors. It will generate what it calls exceptions. Exceptions can be reviewed after the fact, but the ultimate goal of time admin, as we'll call it, is to create the payable time that will, in most cases, go to your payroll system. So whether that's payroll for North America, global payroll, or a third party, it is creating that payable time that will ultimately be used to pay the employee. Payable time can also be approved, or it can not be approved. If payable time does not need to be approved, it is automatically ready to go to the pay sheets or to your third-party system. The payable time is, like I said, can be approved or cannot be approved, but it is a consolidated view of the employee's time for a pay period. So if they're reporting those details of in and out times, payable time is consolidated down to the day or summarized at each day for an employee. So it has a little bit of a different look and feel, but in the end, it represents the reported time that was submitted by the employee and any additional rule processing that happens through the time admin process. As I mentioned, payable time can be loaded into the employee's pay sheets in Payroll for North America, for example. There is a COBOL process that does that, and fairly straightforward. It's you pick the employees you want to load, and it loads them directly to the pay sheets. Things can reject, but that's more details than we're probably looking to get into here. The general idea here, though, I want to get across is that once the payable time is created and potentially needs to be approved and has been approved, it is ready to go to the pay sheets. Time and Labor has a work center, so work centers are becoming more popular in PeopleSoft. Time and Labor got a work center, I want to say probably 6 or 7 years ago, I think, if I recall that correctly. So a very comprehensive way of looking at the data within Time and Labor, being notified of things that need to be approved or any actions that need to be taken on any of the time that's been reported. And then there are many reporting options, a lot of delivered reports. There are delivered pivot grids that are available through the Work Center, but you have your standard SQR reports still available that are delivered by Oracle. So that's kind of a 10,000-foot view of time and labor. Moving on to the things that we're going to talk about today, the auto enrollment. Inside of time and labor, we have a new feature for auto enrolling employees. Before auto enrollment, obviously there's no automated processing available. If you wanted to avoid having your HR offices or managers have to go in and enroll your employees in time and labor, you had to create a custom program that would go do that. And those can be, depending on the size of the organization and the complexity of it, those can be very large processes that can be complicated and difficult to maintain and debug. After auto enrollment becoming available, now we can define which groups we want to auto enroll. You don't have to auto enroll every employee. You can auto enroll certain groups. You can enroll all employees, but it's totally configurable. So we have the enrollment into time and labor. There's also schedule assignments that can be automated. The schedules are handled in time and labor as a part of enrollment separately from the establishment of an employee in time and labor. So this is a separate process in the auto enrollment world. You have options to override defaults both within the auto enrollment rules and from the work groups. You can choose between real-time processing and batch processing. So real-time processing would be if somebody is hired into your organization, you can have the real-time processing pick that new hire up and automatically enroll them in time and labor. You can do it through batch processing, so you can allow those hires and terminations and transfers and all the other job changes that could impact an employee's enrollment. You could process those once a day or once a week or whatever you see fits for your organization. And then there's also reporting. So depending on how you configure the auto enrollment, there are some options that where a manager would need to review and continue the process of the auto enrollment. You can also configure it that step doesn't have to take place. So we'll take a look at all the settings as we go through the auto enrollment and give some visual. Probably could have gone on to this a little bit earlier. This is straight out of PeopleBooks. I think it covers exactly what I would have covered if I tried to recreate this. So might as well take what I've got available to me. In this case here, it's talking about your HR staff and your HR administrators. This could be a variety of different groups of employees or users within your system. But in the end, they're creating transactions in your job data. You've got hires, you've got changes to jobs, you've got terminations, adding employment instances and contingent worker instances. All of that can either trigger the real-time processing to kick in and enroll that employee, or change their enrollment, or inactivate their enrollment, or it can be queued up for batch processing and sent on an established interval that you come up with. The quick fill option, just going over this real quick, allows employees to set up common task reporting definitions. It is a much quicker option. So depending on how you've chosen to configure your task reporting options, employees could have to fill in 10 or 15 different task fields for each time entry that they create. If they're going to be repeating the same thing, or maybe 4 or 5 different tasks over and over again, it would be much quicker for them to create these quick fills and be able to pull that from a drop down when they report their time, which we'll see, and see how all the time gets populated. It eliminates a lot of manual user entry error, and it can also be controlled centrally on what can and cannot be quick filled. So we'll see some live version of that here in a little bit. Also, the timesheet lockdown is quick access for your administrators to get in and restrict access to timesheets that you're trying to process. So if you're running payroll on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you can lock down your timesheets at 11 a.m. or at 1 o'clock, whichever you so choose. And that will restrict anybody from being able to go in and modify a timesheet while you're trying to get it processed and run through payroll. This would be one area where, as we get in there, you'll see that it's not an all or nothing situation, but it might be a good candidate for a custom program that you could schedule to run at these times that you want the timesheets to lock down, and let that program handle doing the lockdown. This would just be a more consistent process for you. But the key here is that the infrastructure exists to lock down timesheets. A few years ago wasn't an option. And so if you had anything that you wanted to lock down, you had a much more complex approach that you would have to take. So a nice feature here too. And again, last thing we're going to go through is a reported time audit. This is in the fluid user interface section. It allows your users to toggle between seeing what is currently on an employee's timesheet and then seeing any historical changes that happened prior to that current version being available. It's got a lot of nice features to it, and we're gonna take a look at that here in just a few minutes. So that being said, we're not at the QA part yet, so let's go ahead and switch over to our demo environment, and of course, been signed out. So the first person I'm going to sign in is just the PeopleSoft administrator. Here we're going to go ahead and start with looking at auto enrollment and how that's set up. So we'll branch back over into the classic view here. And we are going to start in setup HCM, product related, time and labor, and we're going to go to the auto enrollment menu. So in here, we can get to the installation page. The installation page is key. So let's start there. We'll talk about it while we're looking at it. In the time and labor installation component, there's a new tab at the very end called Auto Enrollment. And this is where you ultimately enable auto enrollment. If this checkbox is not selected, you are not auto enrolling anybody. You have the options of choosing between real-time processing or not, so it's checked or not checked. Again, we talked earlier about the real-time processing. This would process a change in job data immediately. It uses the integration broker server to do the processing. And so checked would imply that you're expecting real-time processing. Unchecked, you're going to handle it through a batch process. Preview mode, I mentioned earlier that if you go into preview mode, it's going to require a user to be involved in the process. It basically creates, well, what it says, a preview, and it might have processed 20 employees over the last, let's say, day, and those 20 employees would be reviewed and then ultimately approved to go through the auto enrollment completion. If you don't go with the preview mode and you have real-time processing set up, it will go directly to the enrollment table. If you have that preview mode in, then somebody has to get involved in the middle. The retro time, the retro limit in months determines how far back a change that's made in job data will whether or not it will be included. So what we have set up here is 6 months. So if somebody backdated a change to 8 months ago, it would be out of the realm of, or out of the window that the auto enrollment process would be looking at, and therefore would not get processed. That would be a manual entry situation or manual update. Max employees in a batch, again, this, just kind of dependent on your organization. Default is 100. This is just more for efficiency purposes. Process 100 changes in that batch process. Commit that, go on to the next 100, commit that. This all just, you can play around with this to determine, how quickly you want your process to run. The smaller this is, the longer it would take to run to commit each smaller interval. But at 100, that's where the default is. You can exclude employees from the auto enrollment, and you can do that with a query. So, if we just took a quick peek at this query, this exclusion list, what we would see when we get into the query manager view, just taking a quick peek, maybe a better look would be at the criteria. And here we can see, okay, we won't process an employee if they're not between these employees. And you can modify or create a different query and establish whatever rules you would want to determine who to exclude. But that can be done with the query. The enrollment inactivation, so when an employee terminates and you're going to inactivate their enrollment in time and labor, You don't always want that to happen immediately. You may need to keep them active through the end of a pay period, so that employee or your users, managers, central area folks have access to that employee throughout that pay period. So you have options to inactivate them at the beginning of the next period, or you can pick a number of days after that termination. So you may say, well, we're going to give people 45 days to access that employee, and so that would leave them active for another 45 days after the termination. So that's on the installation page. So once you've got that established, you're essentially ready to go with setting up your auto enrollment configuration. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to look at the two delivered options that they give us. So we have some auto enrollments for folks or employees located in Kansas, and then also at the corporate headquarters in New York. We'll just start with the one in Kansas. And when we get into the first page here, it's a 3-step process. We have everything is effective dated. One thing, if you kind of think back to the menu, there is no delete enrollment group option. So the only way to stop a enrollment group that you've set up is to inactivate it. So you have the option to switch that status. The query, so the define criteria, you use a query to define who is eligible for this group. So if you have, let's just go with a really simple example here. If you have biweekly employees and you have monthly employees, so you might end up with 2 groups of auto enrollment configuration. You would create one query that would go out and identify all of your current biweekly employees, assuming we're working on a biweekly group here. And you define your query, and that then establishes which employees would be eligible to be in your biweekly work group in the time and labor enrollment. So the only thing here really to set up is establish what date you want this to kick in, or if you ever trying to inactivate it, what date you want it to be no longer active. And then establish that query that tells the process who fits into this group. Once you've defined your group of employees, then you're into the enrollment. And this is essentially the same enrollment fields that are established for each time reporter. So if we were to go to maintain time reporter data, we would see a very similar structure to a page there. And this is where you can come in and say, okay, well, anybody in this group, I want to make sure that, you know, they have this task profile ID, or maybe it's a time clock group that you want to assign them to. You can come in and you can choose all of these options, and they become your default for how that employee will be enrolled in time and labor when they meet the qualifications based on your query. Once you've established all of those enrollment fields, then you have your preferences, how do you want that employee to submit their time? How do you want them to report it? How do you want it to be visible to them? These are all configurable items that are established outside of auto enrollment, but then you can configure it within your auto enrollment so that it happens automatically through the process. So these 2 pages that we've just looked at have corresponding standalone pages where this stuff can be established and configured manually. Once you've gone through and done all of your time reporting preferences for the employee, you submit that and it's done and it's ready to go. You've established everything on the installation page, everything's set up. You've created a group. Maybe we just created one group here. You're probably not done with just one group, but potentially. And then it's on to either making your transactions in job data or setting up your batch process. So let's take a quick look at the batch process that is not in setup HCM, but rather out in the time and labor menu. So under time and labor, enroll time reporters, here's the create time reporter data for your new hires and maintain time reporter data if you're going to stick, or what you might currently be doing today with the manual enrollment updates. But under auto enrollments, we now have the ability to go out and process our auto enrollments. And in here, this is just a run control page. So pull that up and take a quick look at what's going on here. We can process bulk enrollments. The bulk enrollments will then, if we select that, it's the enrollment start date. So probably the easiest way to understand this would be when you implement time and labor from the very beginning. Let's say you're going to go live on January 1st, 2021. You need to establish all of your time reporter data, right? Or your time reporter enrollments. You can manually enter all that. You could write a program to do it. You could do it with SQL, but you can also use auto enrollment to do one swipe through and pick up every employee that's current. And you would establish at what date do you want to look at that. So in our case, we would use January 1st, 2021. And it will go out and take all of those enrollment groups. Maybe you've established 50 of them, and take all the employees that meet the criteria for those groups and get them enrolled in time and labor as an initial setup. Now you can do that same process in many other different scenarios. Maybe you've made changes to how you want your biweekly employees to report time. Maybe it's your biweeklies that are on a time clock. So you need to modify your enrollment group, and to get everybody reestablished with the new configuration changes, you can do a bulk enrollment. And that's what that feature allows you to do. Beyond that, it's a pretty straightforward situation here. You can establish one employee that you want to process. You can process all employees, or you can create a query that will determine which groups you want to process, and or which employees you want the process to evaluate to see if any enrollment changes need to take place. So pretty straightforward run control page here. Kick that off, and assuming you're not doing the preview mode, you would be able to go in and see the changes to your time and labor enrollment data, which, as long as that is in effect today or earlier, the employees would also feel the impact of that enrollment change as they go in to report their time. So that's what I wanted to cover on auto enrollment. If there's a couple questions, I don't mind answering them now. If there's anything in particular you would want to look at, I do want to make sure we have time to get through our other things. So if there's nothing pressing right now, we'll continue on to the quick fill option, but we can make sure there's some time at the end here for some more questions. Anybody have anything right now? Okay, I'll take that as a no. I'm going to sign out at this point and sign back in as not the administrator. And we're now in as a time reporter, as a manager. We'll be able to see this both from a manager self-service perspective and from an employee self-service perspective. And this, I think I even went in and set this person up as an administrator, so I can save a little bit of back and forth between logging in or logging out and logging in. So where we're going to start for this person is back in our setup, and we are going to look at time and labor setup, and we're going to look at work groups. So just real quick on work groups, a work group establishes the characteristics that you essentially organize your employees into. So, just taking that really simple example, hourly employees versus salaried employees. You may only need 2 work groups if you're a small organization. So keeping it simple, we have hourly employees in our organization, we have salaried employees. We only need 2 work groups. Well, these work groups define how those employees will report their time, how they'll submit their time, the pieces that are required for them when they report their time. And while we're in here looking at this, what we're really going to focus on right now is on the second page, below all of the approval requirements I mentioned earlier. Are we going to approve reported time? Yeah, for this work group, they are. Are we approving payable time? They're not approving payable time. So this is where that kind of stuff can be configured. But ultimately, what we want to look at here is this use quick fill for time details. So we have this box checked for this work group. And this is the only place where you need to go to set this up. And you can control it. You could say, I only want my hourly employees to be able to do this. I don't need my salaried employees to do it. So I'm not even going to tease them with this quick fill option. You control it by the work group. So if you have 100 different work groups, you can pick any of those 100 that you would want to give this quick fill option to. The person that we're signed in as here is, I don't need to go back there, is a member of that work group. So when we go to employee self-service, click on the time tile. There we go. Oop. I clicked a little early there. We have this set up. Let's go back real quick. I think everybody saw that, but I double clicked on accident. Under the time homepage here for employee self-service, there is the option to set up quick fill. So as I'm going through preparing for this webinar, I decided to go ahead and set up a webinars quick fill option for this employee. And we can click on it and see what did we establish. Well, the task group that I've picked for this quick fill requires activity ID and project ID. But it's also optional to enter the country, state, and locality. So I've gone through and filled those out. And now I've established one quick fill option for me when I go to report my time. Let's cancel out of this and we could go through the process of adding. So let's call another one, presentations. It's all dependent on the task group. So depending on which task group we pick, let's go down and grab KU task. This might, yeah. So we picked a task group, and that will determine based on the task reporting template. So as you establish your task reporting requirements for your organization, you create templates that determine which pieces of information you're looking for your task. As we pick the task group, that will determine the template that we'll see here. So there are, let's say, 15 other fields that could potentially show up here, but these are the only ones that on the template are marked as either optional or as required for the reported time. So if they were required, they would have the standard asterisk in front of the field label so that the employees would know which ones they have to put a value into. So for this case here, let's just go and do USA, and on our state, we'll go ahead and do Missouri. Keep it simple. And we've already established the presentation's name, so save that. Now we have two. So that is pretty much how simple the quick fill setup is. To give you an example of what that would look like, we come back to report our time. Click on the report time icon. We have this quick fill option sitting over here. One thing I do want to point out is, in my experiences, organizations are sometimes not real inclined to allow employees to pre-fill the amount of hours that they work, right? Everybody wants that to be accurate. And so quick fill is not related to, or does not allow you to pick a time reporting code and pick a number of hours. So this is only based on the task reporting option or options. So as we come in here, let's just go ahead and pick regular and say 8 hours. And if we go now, we see our two options in the quick fill dropdown. Let's pick presentations. We look in the time details. Well, there's our fields. Now, maybe the presentations really doesn't stick around with the reported time. It's just basically a conduit to get you these defaulted values. You could also come in here and enter your locality for the city of St. Louis. Right. I'm going to do that. So you can add to it from this point, but it's a way to either establish all the fields that you want to pre-populate, or at least give you a head start. So that's we submit our time, and that essentially is the quick fill option that Oracle's delivered. It'll take a little bit of time here, I guess, to submit that. Any questions while we're waiting for these circles to stop spinning around? Okay. All right. The next thing we're going to go on to is the timesheet lockdown feature. And this user that we're signed in as here, there we go, went through. So that's done. So timesheet lockdown, we're going to move over to the menu. It's a high level here. Drop in the time and labor, report time, and timesheet lockdown. So this is a feature that you don't want everybody to have access to. You can establish based on the role security which users you give the ability to come in here and do the timesheet lockdown. We can see here, obviously our demo environment has a ton of different company and pay group options. So we have a long list of groups that we can lock down timesheets on. But a couple things I want to point out here real quick. Prior periods. So do we want to just lock out prior periods? So maybe we've moved on from the last payroll that we just processed. Those timesheets in theory are done. You have the ability, if you so choose, to lock employees from being able to update a past timesheet. This doesn't keep them from being able to see their timesheet. They can still get in read-only mode and view a timesheet, but they would not be able to correct some time, add time, delete time, and resubmit it for processing. So you have the ability to do that for your prior periods, or you can do it for the current and prior. So I think the example I used earlier was you're getting ready to run payroll. It's nice for your payroll department to be able to have a window of time, even if it's a really short window of time, half hour or something. It's nice for them to have a window where they know I can process this time and get it ready to go to the pay sheets, and I know that there's not going to be a bunch of changes that are happening mid-flight as we're going through this. So you could potentially want to lock down the current and prior pay periods at the same time. Yeah, once you lock them, you also have the ability to come back in here and unlock them. So if you want to lock your current just for a small window of time, you can lock the current and prior pay periods by using the button. Once that period of time is over, you've processed your payroll or you're ready to open it back up, you can come out and unlock all of your pay periods. You have the option to come to select all, and or you can do them by individuals. So if you only want to, I don't know that every organization has 436 combinations here, but if you had 30 of them, you may want to just lock down 5. It might be easy for you to just come in and check the boxes and lock out those employees. But I think I mentioned earlier that if you get into a large number of combinations here, this would be one place where you could consider a custom program that you can schedule that runs at 2 o'clock on payroll days to go out and lock everybody down. You could reschedule it to run again at 8 o'clock after all processing is done and reopen those timesheets. So the key here, I've had many organizations that want to freeze timesheets, at least for the employees and most likely at the approver level, but leave it open for central areas so that they can complete their work and get a payroll processed. And in years past, you had to implement a bunch of different customizations to get that to happen. Here, the structure is there. You just need to go in and establish which groups you want to lock down. So this is a good feature here. Any questions on timesheet lockdowns?
Hey Ryan, this is Charlie. There was
Yeah.
Lori Bryson put a question in the chat. The question
Okay.
is that she didn't see where an employee could record the time that was worked in a different state or locality. So if you don't lock a period and someone enters time in a prior period, how is payroll alerted of those hours for a prior period?
So, that depends on your workflow for approval. If you've established an approval process on that reported time, any changes that are made to prior periods will trigger that approval process. And if you have notifications set up for your supervisors or whoever's doing that approval, that's one way for people to, just generally speaking, people to be notified that a change was made. Um, if you are not requiring approval, the any kind of a change that's made in the past will go through the time administration process. So you can, it's generally speaking, just making a general comment here, you want to be approving either your reported time or your payable time. If you don't require either of those, employees are just making changes to timesheets, both current and past, and they're just feeding through and updating your payroll system. So a general statement is you want some sort of a stop in there where there is a review, and that's where it picks up those kinds of changes that happen in prior periods. I think that answers the question, but if I'm following what you were saying, Charlie, that Lori,
I'll
you're
defer to
welcome.
Lori. Lori, if you're on mute, go ahead and take yourself off and let us know if that gave you enough of an answer.
Well, I'm just wondering, so if we're in the July 31 payroll
Mhm.
and someone is adjusting time from the 1st through the 15th, how does that adjustment get then to the pay line if it's for a period, a prior period that has
Sure.
not been closed?
Yeah. So the payable time that would be generated. So let's just say an employee forgot to report sometime they work on a weekend or something and realized it, went back and reported it, and it went through the approval process. The manager knew, approved it. The time admin process will create that payable time, but the load to the pay sheets does not just look at the current pay period that it's loading for. So in your example, it's not just going to look at July 16th through the 31st. It will look at all open payable time. So payable time has a status. And once it gets processed, then the process doesn't look at it anymore. But while it's open and in the appropriate status, it will pick that up and add it to the pay line, but it will put them under a different earnings begin and end date. So instead of the time that is going to the pay sheet for your current pay period having an earnings begin and end date, generally speaking, of the 16th through the 31st, this time would show up with July 1st through July 15th, and it would be separated off on a different pay line.
Thank you.
Okay. And I do see you had one other question about could we record time that was worked in different state or locality. So when we were going through the quick fill option, we were just saying, maybe in this example that I'm using here, the employee always works in Missouri, okay? You could have employees that work in Missouri and Illinois, or you could have employees that work in New York and California. The quick fill option would be, you could override it. So it's essentially, this is the default that I want to pre-populate in here. So I don't have to go type all this in, but the employee still always has the option to say, oh, even though I want it defaulted to Missouri, for this situation where I'm reporting time on Friday, I was actually working at a facility over in Illinois. And so I need to change that state and probably locality at that point, given the example we used. So that is all. By simply creating a quick fill doesn't mean you're locked in to only the values you put in a quick fill. Okay. All right. So we're getting close here. Let's pop over to the home pages. Again, don't need to click on that. And I want to go through, we'll do this pretty quickly, but the reported time audit. So under the time and attendance homepage, for users that have this access, there is a reported time audit tile. And that brings us into a page where we can search for an employee and take a look at their, whatever window of time we want to look at. So let's take, Kenzie, I think was the one I set up. And I'm going to change this to 7-1. Change this to 731, and we'll get the rows. And what this will do, you can pick any window of time. The larger window of time you pick, the longer it takes to run. Because it is, depending on your approval requirements and saving and submitting requirements that you have for your reported time, there can be a lot of history for just a single pay period. I think here we're looking at least 2 different pay periods, but giving us a big enough window here where we can see some examples. Again, you could pick a 2-month period to review. I had one client that did have some I wouldn't say frequent, but frequent enough that they were constantly looking at managers changing time after an employee submitted it for approval. There would be cases where an employee would stay late, and that would cause them to be getting, a half hour of overtime. And oddly enough, the managers would go in and remove it, and they wouldn't be getting their overtime, and it was a bad deal. And so they would be looking at 6 months worth of data or a year's worth of data, and you can do that here. Just the wider you go in that start date to end date, it's going to slow down a little bit. But what we can see here is our current data, right? Yeah. I was just saying, I thought maybe I picked the wrong window here. But just yesterday, I went in, getting all this set up, and I went out and I changed a time for this employee as the person that we're assigned in as. So you can see the audit user ID is the person that made the change. So at least one thing that we can acknowledge here is that the employee is Kai McKenzie, but the audit user ID is for Joe Patterson, right? So Joe entered the time for Kai, and then with the user that I'm signed in as now came in and changed that time. And we're looking at the current, but we have 2 options. We can see the history rows by expanding all history rows. And when we do that, it will go through this list. Let's go here. And now we can see where these change icons are, which comes from your 1 entry legend up here. The little red dots indicate that something was changed after the initial submission of the time. And so we can now, by expanding all those, maybe you would normally see everything has some sort of a change, whether it's just the status. If you submit time and it needs approval, and then it gets approved, that's a status change to approved, and therefore creates an audit entry. So just depending on your approval requirements and how much activity is happening with the time as it gets submitted, that can impact how much data is going to be returned here. But in our very simple example, just to give you a taste of it, we went out and made 1 change to an end time, an out time, and that change impacts obviously the out time, but it also impacts the punch right before it. So when they came back from lunch, that the time from that lunch break to their out time is stored on the end time coming back from lunch. And when I move that out time further, it further out, it creates more time in that interval. And so it really impacts 2 different punches. And we can see both of them are impacted by that. So I went from 5 o'clock, that was my previous value, to 5:10 p.m., a small change. That obviously now needs to be approved by the supervisor. And it also impacted that 3:15 end time from lunch, because now we're going from 1.75 hours between 3:15 and 5 o'clock to 1.91 hours between 3:15 and 5:10. So again, just giving you some quick examples here of how you can see those historical changes that happen to reported time. You have the ability to do it for all rows, or if you're only, you're producing a list of 30 days worth of reported time, you can come into these icons. Right now they're expanded, but before they were collapsed. And if we collapse them, up here. This is what it would have looked like had I not clicked the expand all history rows. You could come in and by seeing these indicators that something has changed, you could just click on the one row or two rows, whichever ones you want to look at. So again, just more options for your users to be able to analyze the data that's out there. Time and Labor produces a lot of data, especially when it comes to auditing, because there's a lot of activity that happens on timesheets with submitting time and approving it. So some more, certainly up to date with the fluid interface, but more ways to get at that data. So that is all I really wanted to go through in the system here. So any questions? We do have a few minutes and I can stick around if there are some. Check back on the chat here.
I didn't see any more on the chat, Ryan,
Okay,
but I
okay.
have a specific question on that report you were just on.
Yeah.
As I'm sure most end